Welcome everyone to Mascot Insider's coverage of IAAPA 2022. I'm here with a giant here in the mascot industry. We have, of course, Tom Sapp with International Mascots.
Hello,
Tom,
everybody.
it is nice to see you again over the last 3 years, for sure.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
So, obviously, the last 3 years we had a big global pandemic going on.
Sure.
What did your company do, or at least what were some of the challenges that your company had to endure with this pandemic?
Sure. Well, going into it, I don't think we were any different than anybody else, quite honestly. And none of us knew what quite to expect going into it. We did have to furlough the staff for a while, and I lost about half my staff, which was interesting. But coming out of COVID, one of the more interesting things is all of the clients and people that sat on their designs for 2 years are now back. Excellent. And we are booked literally into spring and early summer already this year. And I have found that talking to other manufacturers that they're in the same boat. Everybody's really busy, so the industry is doing fantastic, as far as workload goes and things like that. But for us, coming out of it was, again, trying to restaff, trying to I got a couple of my seamstresses back, but finding qualified people, we're trying to build staff back up. So we're always looking for sculptors, people that have some experience in the business. I hired a couple of apprentices, but anytime we use apprentices in the business, you got to train them. So somebody's got to take their time, obviously, off of the line and use it, but it's been great. We got a couple of great people, and we're slowly building the staff back up, and it's actually, quite honestly, kind of an exciting time in the business.
Amazing. Now, over the last 3 years, what have been some of the new projects, or at least completed projects, that you've had the chance to work on over the last 3 years?
Well, the most recent thing was the reintroduction of Toys R Us. We had built the Jeffrey Giraffe costumes to them for several years prior to their bankruptcy. Well, they've come back as Macy's toy department in the stores, and we immediately had to build 37 Jeffrey costumes in our Atlanta office, which we just delivered about 2 weeks ago. Great Wolf Lodge came back with all of their characters with a total redesign of every character. So we had to go in, build all new prototypes. We finished 21 sets of their mascots so far, and we've had several clients like that. Chick-fil-A has come back like a storm coming out of COVID, because a lot of the fast food restaurants and several of our what we call costume management characters, where we send out their characters for appearances, had pulled their characters off the market just because of COVID. So now everybody's come back, wanting Chick-fil-A cows, costumes, and that's another exciting part of the business, is with our existing clients that just had to pull back during COVID are now back stronger than ever.
Wow. Now, I know you mentioned the Great Wolf Lodge, that you had to redesign those mascots, and you're lucky enough to actually have some of those redesigned. How many kind of rough drafts did you go through before you kind of got solid on this design?
Well, this is one of those clients that provided us with excellent artwork, and we had turnarounds of the characters. But what my challenge is when we have characters that are designed by clients, and it's great artwork, and there was, is we have to make it work as a costume on a human being, because animated proportions don't usually fit that well. So we had to kind of reconfigure everything, where the vision is, how tall is one character to another character. And that's the first stage we do, is we go through that stage of artwork, get that approved, and we're building actually 5 different characters for them right now. Violet and Wiley are the 2 that we started with. So.
Wow. Now, obviously a lot of other mascot companies kind of delve into inflatables or different materials, or even 3D printing.
Right.
Is there any particular reason that you don't do inflatables, that you kind of stick with the traditional form of the furred mascots?
Well, it's a very specialized business, if you can imagine. It's highly engineered, much more than people think. Joel was just describing, we met with Signs and Shapes yesterday, which is a company we use to build inflatables we design. And I think they have a cutting table I think it's like 8 feet wide and probably 40 feet long, I'm guessing, that's computerized. It has to cut these panels exactly. They can't be miscut. And the fit and the seams to be inflatable and hold the pressure is such a specialized thing, and they are excellent. they built a Delta airplane for me a few years ago that was a wearable inflatable with the pilot standing up out of the middle of it. Wow. I had to stand him up through it where it's a human being, but it had to be an inflatable around him. The wings can't droop. So it was really a challenge to design it. And like I said, it's just such an involved process that we find it's just a lot better to work directly with somebody who's an authority.
Who's definitely more specialized.
Exactly, absolutely.
Now, what about 3D printing? 3D printing is becoming a big, definitely a popular method on specialized mascots, especially if you want to cut costs or pieces that might be a little bit more complex. Is that something that you guys are looking into as well?
Absolutely, and it's interesting you ask about it because we just had a conversation this morning with Simon from Rainbow Productions. He's kind of a sister company to us in London, and he was telling us about his investment in 3D printing for doing all parts and pieces of all their characters and how he can now have it running over the weekend producing parts and things that people come in on Monday and assemble everything. So we were just having that discussion this morning, and we're certainly looking into it. We haven't committed to it yet, but I think the industry's headed that way.
Definitely. Where do you find your company heading off into the next, maybe year or two with the direction, just like with the types of mascots that you're designing and making?
We are International Mascot. We've been kind of at a state of the art for several years as far as foams and things like that go. I work with a guy who's doing a lot of slosh molding for us now with rubber faces that we're experimenting with. We're always trying different materials, but I don't really see the base construction of the costumes changing a whole lot. It's really the talent of the sculptors, and I worked with a lot of sculptors for a lot of years. It's the people that can look at a simple drawing and convert it into dimension and keep it accurate and turning. So anything like CAD programs where we can turn characters and look at them and view them in different sizes. Certainly the 3D printing is what that we're looking at will be helpful going forward. I just don't know how fast that will happen. I think we'll be in pretty much the same mode going forward, but we will have things that help out, that help with different areas of building a costume. But somebody just sitting and sculpting the foam and sewing the seams is always going to be with us.
Fair enough. Now, for some of our lovely viewers that aren't familiar with you, what's kind of the history and the origin of International Mascots, and how did it kind of begin?
Well, it's a very interesting company. We've been here almost 40 years. It's out of Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. And Joe Olivier and Brian Baker had decided to have a corporate event company. So they were putting together events in Edmonton, and they were renting costumes. They didn't like them. So they said, well, why don't we build our own? So they went out, had some costumes built, and people started coming to the event saying, well, where did you get those costumes? So he and Brian formed International Mascot, started building their own, and it's grown from there. And so it has a tremendous history with Brian. Brian died a few years ago. He was his partner, but Joe Olivier is still the president, and one of the nicest guys I've ever worked with in my life. He's a terrific partner in the business. And we kind of started several years ago specializing in multiple costumes. My studio, which was Real Characters a few years ago, we could do one or two costumes at a time. I got the Chick-fil-A business, which was then Doodles the Chicken, and loved the design I did, but they came back to me and said, well, we need a couple of hundred of these characters. Well, we didn't do that. But I knew that Joel had built a few costumes for me, and I knew that they did multiples and they specialized in it. So I brought Joel down. The little chicken called Doodles ultimately became the cows, which, because of their ability to do multiple costumes for people like Little Caesars, Sonic, a lot of clients like that we just do multiples. We've done almost 5,900 cows now. So one of the things that's unique about IMC is that ability to roll out a costume over and keep it at a franchise price. We understand that franchisees can only pay a certain amount, so we designed the costume with that in mind. We still have our prototypes, we still do our one-offs, We do all that stuff, so it's a really nice balance. But that's one of the specialties of IMC, is we're able to take a client's mascot and produce multiple costumes for them.
Now, with you at International Mascots, what's been kind of like the biggest challenge with designing a mascot? Is it kind of like the design? Is it the material that you're using? Is it like what the client's kind of asking for? Or is it kind of like a role of all three?
There's really no one thing. It's every single client is different, and that's what I love. You never know from one day to the next what you're going to be asked to do. And I've used the example of the College Football Hall of Fame several times. They came to us several years ago down here and said, we're building this hall and we're going to need a character. So I met with them in Atlanta, and usually as confident as usual, going, oh, absolutely, I can do that for you. And they said, oh, by the way, it can't be anything. We represent every single college. It can't be a bear, it can't be a bird, it can't be a dog. It can't. So I walked away going, oh yeah, sure, I can do that. So I sat down and thought about it, and I called my friend David Raymond, who was a Philly fanatic for years. And I said, Dave, I want to do something that's fantasy, like a fanatic-like character. And I got his input, and I created Fumbles, which is a kind of a fanatic type of character, but very different looking. And I made him half blue and half gray because fans paint their faces blue and gray. And the last thing we thought about, you know, what's going to make him unique? What's going to separate him from other mascots? And I came up with the idea to use goalpost as his ears. Welcome
buttons. Patches.
Buttons is our corporate bear. We have buttons and patches. This is patches. Buttons was that earlier. I had to look.
Don't feel bad. I had to do it as well.
But you talk about costume design. One of the things that we talk about this character all the time, and for anybody that has to design a character, particularly that's being asked to be kid-friendly.
Of course.
The thing about this character is the size of the character and how kids relate to it. And by this particular design, we're able to keep the face down low. Of course, it's a very friendly face. Patches is a friendly little bear. But it's a very, very successful and has tremendous appeal for kids. So when we can bring a character down to kids' level that's designed for kids, we take that opportunity to do that. And this is just a great example of that.
So with like patches, like do you guys do like testing? Like do you bring kids in as you're kind of developing to see what their reception is and like maybe kind of make alterations with that, or do you do something different?
Not in the case of patches and buttons. We started bringing them down here years ago.
Okay.
They come with us every year, and
we're always so glad to have them.
And what we noticed was the reaction. And I've got videos on my phone from multiple years of being here of kids running to patches. We have people that come by the booth every year to get their picture made with patches and buttons. They said, we've been coming by and getting our pictures made for 6, 8, 7 years. You know, so it's one of those things where we notice that kind of stuff. And you think, well, what makes it appealing? And that's what it is. So we just talked to a client earlier today about a little pirate character. And we said, we can bring this character down, we can look out the hat, we can build it on this same platform and have you a user-friendly kid's costume. They absolutely loved it.
And it must warm your heart to see characters like Buttons and Patches kind of get that reaction with
every year.
Guests.
I love seeing it every single year. It's one of my favorite things to do is seeing, and not just these characters, any character that we do. The real reward, and Joel and I talk about this all the time, is seeing people react to what you do. And it's in a positive, it's happy. Joel often says we sell magic. You know, I call it a suspension of belief, where kids come up and they just see this, and it's not a person in a costume. It's patches, it's buttons, it's those things. And to me, that's one of the most rewarding things of what we do.
Well, thank you so much, Tom, for taking the time out of your busy day.
Well, it's great. I hope I'll see you next year.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, don't forget, you can find more coverage of IAAPA 2022 at mascotinsider.com and also on our YouTube channel. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button and smash that notification bell.
Bye-bye. Thanks, guys.